Point of View with Shirley Polk. 214-403-7563. The Point of View 1 at yahoo.com. And I have a great topic, getting rid of your guilt. And going through here on the internet, I found this great site. I don't think I've been to this site before, but it came up just what I needed and wanted to talk about today. It's a life on your terms. A life on your terms.com. A life on your terms.com. And this article today is getting rid of your guilty conscience once and for all. And it's by Liz, okay? Getting rid of your guilty conscience once and for all. And I know that each of us at one time or another, it might be right now, we have some guilt complex, something that's going on in our lives that we just feel guilty about, something that we regret. But we don't have to regret that to our harm, okay? We can't do anything about the past. We cannot go back and rectify the past. So whatever has happened in the past, we have to move forward from here. Go forward, all right? So the many faces of guilt is where we'll start. And remember, this is a life on your terms.com. And getting rid of your guilty conscience once and for all. And we have to work on these things, these topics, these subjects. We have to work on them in order to be able to be successful. The many faces of guilt. Guilt is the only human emotion that requires our consent to thrive, with the possible exception of jealousy. Okay? To feel guilt, not only do we have to earn it, but we also have to accept it. This is by Liz, okay? It's anger, disappointment, or shame in ourselves for something we did or didn't do. Do you hear that? Real guilt comes from failing your own expectations for yourself. Real guilt needs our permission to exist. Oh, this is good. It's sneaky and brilliant and invisible. Talking about guilt, okay? We're talking about getting rid of your guilty conscience once and for all. But instead of completely destroying you, it will leave you a mangled and unrecognizable mess of a human being. Do you hear that? It will leave you a mangled and unrecognizable mess of a human being. It said, instead of completely destroying you, this is what it'll do to you. It's the worst kind of self-induced punishment, and it's the most evil form of manipulation. My. It is. People run other people's lives by using the guilt complex, using guilt. That's why we have to guard ourselves against it. And remember, Greater Gospel Temple's topic this morning, the subject was, be on your guard. See how God works and He brings things together for me. He'll do the same for you. If He's not doing it or you don't feel He's doing it, He'll do the same for you. That's why we have to guard ourselves against it. Good people are all too susceptible to feeling guilt for things they have no business feeling guilty about. Oh, this is really nice. I'll give you a personal example. This is Liz talking about her own self, okay? She said, my father left when I was 4. He was kind of around and kind of not around. She said, I really got to know. She said she never really got to know him. She said, I'm approaching 30 now, and my mom still expects me to love him. She's talking about guilt, and she's using it for her own, from her own personal life, okay? She said, at first I felt really guilty because I wasn't able to. I just couldn't. She said, I knew he was my dad, and we had some great years together, not that I can remember, but I just couldn't love him no matter how hard I tried. She said she felt like a terrible person. Have you ever experienced this with someone? Something happening in your life? Have you had, or something that has happened in your life? She said, I felt guilty for not loving my dad. Then I felt angry at my mom for making me feel guilty. Then I felt guilty for being angry at my mom. You know what? I think I've done this before. But let me do it again. I have nothing in my archive on this page, okay? The point of view is Shirley Polk. So I think I've done this. The more I read, the more familiar it is with me. Okay, I was forced to really think about why I was feeling guilty about something I felt so right about. Have you ever been in that place? Are you in that place now? She said, I wasn't failing my own expectations, so it couldn't be real guilt. It must have been something else. Years later, I realized that the guilt I felt for not living up to my mother's expectations was actually resentment at having those expectations placed on me in the first place. You see how she realized this? It took her a while, but she realized it. So that's why we have to think. We have to have that open mind and be able to decipher the thoughts that come through our mind. And most of all, the first thing we have to ask God to help us, okay? To help us, bless us to do this. She said, I didn't deserve to feel guilty, and he didn't deserve my love. Not all parents earn the love of their children. He wasn't there to pick me up from school, take care of me when I was sick, yell at me when I misbehaved, sit at every doctor's appointment with me like my mom was. I wish all the time I could know what a father-daughter bond feels like, she said, but I can't. She's talking about her personal experience, and I'm sure that some of you listening to me and watching me now have had that experience also and might be going through it right now. But take this from Liz, okay? She said, does it make me sad? She said, definitely. Do I feel guilty? She said, not anymore. And I'm not any less of a person for it. She has come to that conclusion. She's dealt with it, okay? Now, we're going to talk about the anatomy of guilt. The anatomy of guilt. What is guilt made of? Sometimes we know when we feel guilty, and sometimes the guilt is hidden in our psyche. Now, here are a few ways to tell if you or someone else is feeling guilty. Number one, when you think about something you did or didn't do, you feel like less than nothing, okay? Number two, you feel like you need to rationalize or justify your behavior even when you weren't asked to. Have you ever felt like that? Number three, you argue and get defensive when anyone talks about the behavior or action. Feel guilty, you feel defensive, okay? So number four, when you think about your behavior, it's painful. We're talking about the anatomy of guilt. What is guilt made of? How do you act when you feel guilty? Number five, when you think about the behavior, you dislike yourself. When you think about the behavior, you dislike yourself. All right. Knowing that you feel guilty doesn't mean that you should actually be feeling guilty. Understand that, get that. That's a good point. Knowing that you feel guilty doesn't mean that you should actually be guilty. Many of our parents guilted us when we were children, for real. Their intentions were good, but the result became an adult incapable of distinguishing between their values and the values of others. Parents do the best that they can, many of them, the majority. I believe we all do the best that we can. Yes, we have regrets and we have guilt. So today, after today, we're going to deal with that, okay? This is important because the only thing that matters is your relationship with yourself and your own values. You hear that? Ask yourself these questions. We're talking about getting rid of the guilty conscience forever, okay? By whose standards are you judging? You have to remember that by whose standards? Are you judging by your standards or are you judging by somebody else's standards for you? If the standards are yours, why do you believe in these standards? Are you sure they are your beliefs and not someone else's? If the standards aren't really yours, ask yourself, what do you really believe about this issue? Okay, if they're not your standards, ask yourself what you feel about it, how you feel about this, okay? Now, what if you were 120% sure that no one would ever find out? Would you still feel guilty? Good question. Now we go to the relationship between guilt and self-esteem. The relationship between guilt and self-esteem. This is covering a lot, and it's not taking me a long time to do it. Guilt is poisonous to your self-esteem. It really is. It can be, well, what we said earlier, it might not ultimately destroy you, but it will make you so low that you feel you can't recover from it, okay? So this is the relationship between guilt and self-esteem. Guilt is poisonous to your self-esteem. The entire definition of guilt centers around berating yourself and punishing yourself for something you did or didn't do. So whether or not the guilt is real, it still leads to a loss of integrity. My goodness, you lose faith with yourself, dislike yourself, feel pain, hate yourself. So in order for your self-esteem to remain healthy, you must, you hear me? You must address any lingering guilt you have. Either cut off foggy guilt or emancipate yourself from real guilt. Okay, so we're going to talk about the foggy guilt and the real guilt. All right. To live with guilt is to live with cancer and refuse treatment. The only result is death. My. What is foggy guilt? In the example with her dad, this is Liz talking again. She said, I was suffering from foggy guilt. Okay, so it's a different emotion disguised as guilt because we're afraid to confront the real emotion at hand. Does that sound familiar? Yes, it does to me. The vast majority of our guilt is foggy guilt. Not surprisingly, most of our guilt comes from the people we love when they don't approve of something or reproach us for our behavior. My goodness. Most of our guilt comes from the people we love when they don't approve of something or they reproach us for our behavior. That is so true. It is so true. Sometimes we're intimidated by the values of others, so we feel guilty and sacrifice our self-esteem to placate them, which leads to guilt, okay? Now, there are times when you feel guilty because you failed to live up to the expectations of someone else. You disappointed them. You disappointed them. But what you're feeling isn't guilt. It's anger. It's anger at those who assumed they could place expectations on you that you didn't believe in. Man, this is really bringing it out. Instead of telling that person that you don't give a cahoot of what they expected you to do, you hold it in and feel guilty because you're afraid of confrontation. And you've heard me say before, I don't like confrontation, but if I have to, confront someone, I will do it. And I will do it to the best of my ability in as peaceful a manner as I can. But I do not like confrontation. And I will remove myself from this situation if necessary to avoid confrontation. But now if I cannot avoid the confrontation, then the confrontation will take place, okay? But I will try to follow peace with all men, and I do, and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. So I try, okay? I try. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I said I try. And I want to please God. I don't want to feel guilty. And that's what the devil does. He puts guilt trips on us, if he possibly can. If you feel like something is immoral, ask yourself if you really believe that, or if you're afraid of challenging the beliefs of your loved ones. Now, the next phase here is to be willing to stand by and act on your own beliefs and convictions. To eliminate foggy guilt, you have to respect your own judgment over anyone else's. I must repeat that. To eliminate foggy guilt, you have to respect your own judgment over anyone else's. And she said, I know, I hear you, you're panicking, you're all like, well, what am I supposed to do about it then? So she says, relax. Just relax, okay? Relax. Take a deep breath and exhale. Relax, all right? It's going to be all right. You're going to get rid of this guilt forever, okay? It's foggy guilt, whatever kind of guilt it is, okay? Relax. We're getting there. If you or a loved one are suffering from foggy guilt, there's a hotline you can call, 888-LIZ-ROCKS, or she says, or follow the steps before. Number 1, be honest with yourself. It always starts with honesty. Get used to it. Number 2, own your anger, your intimidation, your fear. Own it. If it's yours, you own it, okay? Number 3, admit your resentment at standards and expectations not truly your own. Number 4, watch the guilt evaporate. If you're feeling guilt, or you're feeling guilt weren't an option, you probably demand to know by what right anyone expects you to do X, Y, Z thing. Why are you obligated to live up to the expectations of others but leave yours in the gutter? My. These are things that we must think about. We must deeply think about, analyze them, okay? Now, asserting yourself is hard, especially when you have to be assertive towards the people you love. Guilt is an easy way to avoid that assertion, okay? You're better than that, okay? You are better than that. Don't be a coward. You're better than that. Don't be a coward. Now, when you really mess up, this is the next one, subtopic, when you really mess up. Now, there will be times when you mess up. You do something that's against your beliefs and you feel terrible about it. We all mess up. Every one of us messes up. None of us don't mess up sometime or the other, okay? I just put it like that, all right? The solution is not to tell yourself that you're a rear end and you should die a horrible, painful death in a pit of snakes and fire and flesh-eating bacteria. She says, I've been there, okay? So you don't have to do all that and think all of that, okay? Now, That just leads to more bad behavior. It leads to, well, I'm a horrible person anyway, so why bother? Okay? You don't want to think like that. You don't want to think like that. But that's what it leads to. All right? If you allow yourself to think bad of yourself, okay? Instead, have a little compassion. Yes, you're wrong, but seek to understand your ways so that you will never do it again. Feel remorse and regret instead of self-hatred. Don't hate yourself. Feel the remorse and regret that you're supposed to feel. Don't do it again. Okay, ask yourself, what were the circumstances? Why did you do what you did at that time? What were you trying to do? In what way were you trying to take care of yourself? And so you act out of self-interest, which is how you should always act unless you betray your values, all right? But it doesn't end there. That's only the first step. It doesn't end there. That's only the first step. Ladies and gentlemen of the blogosphere, she said she has a 5-step plan. Number 1. Understand the circumstances in which you behaved and replace that behavior with a different one so that you act with more integrity the next time. See, there are always solutions. There's always a solution to the problem, okay? There's always an answer to the question. Always. It might not be what we like all the time, but there's always a solution to the problem and an answer to the question. Always remember that. Understand the circumstances in which you behaved and replace that behavior with a different one so that you act with more integrity the next time. Number 2, own the fact that you did it. Number 3, acknowledge its explicitly to anyone you hurt what you've done and acknowledge explicitly to anyone you hurt what you've done and tell them you understand the consequences of your behavior. 4, do everything you can to make amends or mitigate the harm you've caused. Number 5, make firm commitment to behave differently in the future. If you don't change, you'll recreate self-distrust. And let me go back to this. Acknowledge explicitly to anyone you hurt what you've done and tell them you understand the consequences of your behavior. Like in the Greater Gospel Temple's webcast this morning. Ask for forgiveness. Repent of your sins and be saved. All right. Guilt and compassion don't mix. Guilt and compassion don't mix. As long as you keep thinking how horrible you are, you're always going to feel defensive and self-protective, and you'll never be able to make amends. Guilt is not something you should glorify in, okay? It's not a proper punishment. It's a cop-out. It's something you can hide behind so you don't have to go through the challenge of making up for it to yourself and the people you hurt. She said, I feel guilty enough already. Should be replaced with, I'm suffering, so that should be enough punishment to satisfy you. But suffering is the easiest thing you can do. It's being happy that's hard. My goodness. Suffering is the easiest thing you can do, but being happy is the hardest part. Because happiness requires emancipation from guilt, not to surrender to it. Not to surrender to it. My, this is good. And that's a good note to end on. Now, but I won't, because there's more. The end of your love affair with guilt. The end of your love affair with guilt. We've got to end this, okay? So we're talking about the end of your love affair with guilt. Are you having a secret love affair with guilt? Are you sure? Because it's not hard to do. So are you sure you're not having a secret love affair with guilt? Attaching ourselves to guilt makes it easy to stay passive about our behavior. I'm guilt-ridden. I'm a disappointment. I've always been a failure. That's life. Can't change it. Do you have that attitude? Well, I rebuke that attitude in you right now in the name of Jesus. From now on, you're going to do better and feel better about yourself. Which actually means, look, I have great reason for you never to expect anything of me, and it's not even my fault. Some people actually think like that. Suffering is familiar. How would you handle life if you didn't have your depression and self-hatred to defend you? Who knows what people will start expecting from you, what you will start expecting from yourself. Unhappiness provides its own kind of safe haven, whereas happiness is more demanding, okay, in terms of consciousness, energy, discipline, dedication, and integrity. This is really good. I like this, Liz. It takes courage to work at liberating ourselves from guilt. It takes honesty and perseverance and a commitment to independence and to living consciously, authentically, responsibly, and actively. It takes that. But first, they said it takes honesty. Then you have to persevere. And then you have to be committed to being independent. All right? Now, depending on who you are, this can take a long time. You're afraid of changing because you built your life around self-castigation, self-denial, and self-guilt. It's a prison you built around yourself, and it's easy to stay captive in your own chains. So true. Unfortunately, the prisons we build for ourselves are the hardest to escape from. You may wonder if you even have a right to escape at all. Guilt can do that to you. Guilt can do that to you. Guilt can lead to so much harm. So much harm. And one of those is suicide. It can lead to suicide. So you've so much more good inside of you than bad. Don't let the overwhelming feeling of guilt prevent the good from prevailing. Escape. Use the methods above and escape from that guilt. You have to escape from that guilt. You have a right to break free from your chains. Are you really going to let your fear of change rule your life? Are you really going to do that any longer? Don't let the fear of change rule your life any longer, okay? There are no buts, and there are no excuses that are valid enough to justify throwing the majority of your life away for fear of giving up your guilt and suffering. You have a right to release yourself from the expectations of others and focus on your own expectations. And she's saying, Liz is saying here, she said, I understand you're afraid, but to not try at all is inexcusable. It's unacceptable. It's a slap in the face of life. A slap in the face of life. You do have a right to be guilt-free. You do have a right to be guilt-free, to live a guilt-free life. So as of today, as of this moment, even when we first started this webcast, You can get rid of that guilty conscience forever. Don't let it rule over you anymore. I declare and decree in the name of Jesus that from this day forward you will be guilt-free. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to come to you right now and be able to share with you what I found on the internet. You're going to be guilt-free from this day forward. Your conscience is not going to weigh you down with guilt from this day forward. Enjoy your day. 214-403-7563. The point of view 1 at yahoo.com.